Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, welcome back. And there's no quarterback restructure to talk about. There's no linebacker stuff to talk about. What do we talk about in the offseason?
I guess Will Smith slapped a guy, and now Zoe Kravitz is canceled. That's how that works.
That is usually how that works. It's more like a butterfly effect sort of thing. Like the Minnesota Vikings decide upon a root beer to sponsor, and the world just starts on fire. Like all these things just sort of happen.
Yeah. I should not be surprised by the extended and random nature of reality at this point, especially having covered the Vikings in a podcast that has an existentialism corner. But, it's kind of weird.
But here we are. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. It is the off season, so we're doing one episode every 2 weeks, and we got bonus stuff going out on Patreon. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us. We have plenty to talk about. The Vikings are signing former Packers, a number of them recently, which is a bit odd, but we're going to go with Za'Darius Smith and everybody. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the Thielen restructure and what actually happened as far as when he's getting paid and how and what. Also, a rule change came in just today about overtime, and we get to talk about it as far as playoff stuff is concerned. And we have the mailbag as well. But before everything, thanks so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show, you can go to patreon.com/Norse Code and donate there. You can get all sorts of content for your money over $3.50 a month. Patreon.com gets you access to things like the Discord, bonus episodes, and all that. And also, before we hit up the Patreon stuff, just want to make a quick mention that we will be putting out a bonus episode for everyone here in the next couple of days. Just a little bonus thing, a little taste of what the Patreon people typically get. So check that out. We're looking forward to doing that. We do this once or twice a year just as a reminder. This is something that's available. And if you enjoy it, go ahead and head over to Patreon for $3.50 a month. You can join us over there. So with that said, let's get into a little bit of Patreon stuff. Got a couple of people we want to thank over on Patreon. So I want to thank Andrew Schuba. Thank you so much for signing up over on Patreon, along with Sam Hayes and Mike Skoglund. Again, thanks so much for going over to patreon.com/Norse Code. You can also go to paypal.me/Norse Code if you'd like to do a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and check out the merchandise there. They actually just updated our main page over at Threadless, so check that out. All the shirts and everything are kind of laid out a little bit easier to find. So if you're interested, norsecode.threadless.com is the place to go for all of that. So, all of that aside, let's get into the show itself. The Vikings have a couple of signings, and I think the biggest one so far has been Za'Darius Smith. And his contract he was originally going over to the Ravens and then declined the Ravens and came over to the Vikings. How exactly is all of this working as far as paying him?
Yeah, it's pretty odd because he agreed to a deal, or agreed to terms with the Ravens that averaged about $8.75 million a year. And then a couple of deals were announced for players like Chandler Jones and Von Miller that were substantially higher. And they're both 2 or 3 years older than Za'Darius Smith. And so my guess is, and this is kind of the speculation from a couple of people, including Mike Florio, PFT, and a couple of other people that follow the contract stuff and free agency, is that he thought he might be able to get more if he shopped himself around, which, power to him. The Ravens are often not the top pairs on the market, even for players that they re-sign. So fine. So he goes out and he signs a deal with the Vikings, and initially that deal with the Vikings sounds spectacular. He makes 60% more average salary with the Vikings than he does with the Ravens, something like $14 million, right? That's pretty incredible. And you think, well, okay, so he loses a year on the deal because it's a 4-year deal with the Ravens, a 3-year deal with the Vikings. But I think that there's still just 2 years guaranteed in both deals as they were originally reported. And then you take a look at the Vikings contract structure, and there is no way it's a 3-year deal. I mean, it's a 3-year deal on paper, and it's not a void year in the third year. There is a contract that the Vikings have that extends into the third year. They pay him if he's on the roster, but it's over $20 million in that third year. The first year, the Vikings have created what is effectively a not like a cheat code or a loophole, but essentially a way to get out of being charged against the cap this year for his salary. So he has a per game roster bonus, and per game roster bonuses are performance bonuses, which means that they are classed in one of two categories: likely to be earned and unlikely to be earned. So this is how incentives work in every contract structure. So those incentives can be, snaps played, games played, and then statistics that are agreed upon in the NFL CBA. So, for example, sacks count as a statistic that can be used as an incentive. So can passing yards, so can receiving yards, touchdowns. You can also use postseason performance. If you make it to the playoffs, if you make it to a certain round of the playoffs, if you make it to the Super Bowl, if you win the Super Bowl, you can use postseason accolades like All Pro and Pro Bowl. You can't use tackles, because tackles are scored by the home team scorer in a particular stadium, and they're not standardized like sacks are. They review sacks after a game. So I find that kind of funny. Anyway, those incentives are classed in likely to be earned or unlikely to be earned based off of essentially the previous. I mean, there's some nuances to this, but essentially based off of the previous year's performance. So if you have a sack incentive that rewards you with $3 million after you get 10 sacks, if you had in the previous year earned 10 sacks, the cap would reflect that $3 million. You still have to earn it in order to receive the money, but the way the cap accounts for it is that the team is charged $3 million against the cap at the beginning of the season. So that's kind of how it works. They don't automatically receive the $3 million. They still have to hit the bonus in order to receive the money. But the way the cap accounts for it is those $3 million. Well, Za'Darius Smith only played one regular season game, 2 total games if you include the playoffs, but that's not part of the bonus structure. One regular season game, and so his likely to be earned performance incentive is 1 game. And so the Vikings have given him a fairly standard salary amount, but in a non-standard way in per game roster bonuses. And normally agents wouldn't agree to this sort of thing because you want to ensure your client in terms of the total amount of money that they'll receive and that they're guaranteed to get in case of some like injury or some other off-field instance, right? Where as an agent, you want to make sure that you protect your client. But here, the Vikings are essentially saying, look, we know he's going to play these games. He's healthy, but we don't have to worry about the impact that this has on the cap. And we'll give you a signing bonus that will guarantee some level of money, and we'll guarantee this year's salary. And heck, we'll guarantee some of next year's salary too. But this will allow us to kind of manipulate the cap and kind of build a team around him. And he's still probably going to get a good chunk of this money anyway. So that's how they did it. And that resulted in a very friendly contract structure. He ends up costing $3.3 million against the cap. His base salary is completely guaranteed for the year, $1.45 million, but he has a per-game roster bonus of $3 million. What's also interesting about his contract is that the per-game roster bonus, and it's not $3 million per game, it's $3 million divided by 17 per game. But that $3 million roster bonus is in every part of his contract. So none of it gets counted in our initial cap calculations. Now, there are some like nuances to likely to be earned and not likely to be earned incentives that like you can take it to arbitration and stuff like that, but for the most part, it doesn't matter. So his cap number in 2023 is $14.17 million, right? And so if that happens, if he ends up playing, let's say 17 games this year, his cap number this season will have to go up, but it'll occur at the end of the season. So what'll in effect happen is that they'll take that money away from the Vikings' available rollover cap, because any cap you have left over at the end of one season, you can roll over to the next season. You have to like opt in. I don't know why you wouldn't, but you have to. And so it gets taken out of that, and then it gets subtracted against available cap space in the next year for any amount that's left over. That's why in 2010 or 2011, the Vikings decided essentially to cut Antoine Winfield right before he left for the Seahawks, because he had hit a performance incentive that was classed as not likely to be earned. He earned it, and in order for the Vikings to avoid the cap hit, they needed to cut him, and so they did. So, very cruel business, right? So the amount of available cap goes down, but then also on top of that, and again, this is me reading the numbers that over the cap. It might be a little bit different. Maybe that per game roster bonus is only in the contract this year, but based off of what it looks like on here, that per game roster bonus is in effect every season. So if that happens, that means his roster bonus then becomes likely to be earned, which also means that his cap number next year goes up to 17 million, not 14 million. For some reason, his projected cap number in over the cap and in Spot Track includes him hitting that per game roster bonus of 14.2 million. So, there is no official cap number for 2023. The NFLPA does not put out amounts for what somebody's cap hit is going to be the next year or anything like that. So both of these sites are essentially being bold enough to project that if he hits that per game roster bonus, he'll get that in his cap number this year. So yeah, I find that kind of funny, but like what ends up happening is his cap number this year will functionally have been 6.3 million. So it's not like awful, right? Like 3.3 million is a steal. 6 million is great. And then next year, that's what it's gonna subtract that 3 million that he gets out of next year's cap or out of the rollover. But his cap number of 14.2 million or 14.16 million, will be adjusted for how many games he played last year. I know it sounds very confusing, but what essentially ends up happening is that he's got a cap hit of 3 million this year, a cap hit of 14 to 17 million next year, depending on how you want to think about the per game roster bonus being applied to the 2023 cap. And then a cap hit of 21.6 million or 21.7 million in 2024. And I just don't believe that at age 32, he'll get that. He'll only have 1.6 million dead against the cap because of the signing bonus, and so he'll probably get cut or renegotiate that contract going forward. So that's that contract. Now the player is very good. Like there's not really a way to other way to put it. When he was at Baltimore, he played in a rotational role. And Baltimore sometimes will ask their rotational edge rushers not to be designated pass rushers, which they are sometimes. Like that's what Jason Owa was last year, but rather, or Odafe Owa, sorry. But rather that Za'Darius Smith would often be, doing stuff like, checking run first before exploding upfield. And so his numbers at Baltimore were not amazing. He got a really great deal for him heading over to Green Bay. He got to pair with Preston Smith, and then he led the league in 2019 in total pressures. Number 2 was Danielle Hunter. I'm sure like a lot of people who follow Vikings Twitter are now very well acquainted with that fact. It's very exciting that the last time both of them were healthy in the same year, they were number 1 and 2 in pressures, at least among edge rushers. But I think total kind of depends on what Aaron Donald did. Either way, really impressive to be able to pair both of those players together. In 2020, his pressures dropped off somewhat significantly. His sack total only dropped off a little bit. His pressure totals became not in the hundreds, which is he had something like 109 or something, depending on how you count and who you ask and whether or not you include the playoffs. But somewhere between 89 and 109, I think, depending on the way that you count. But they dropped to 55 in 2022, which sounds like, oh my God, they got cut in half. He must have been awful. But no, he was actually still top 10 among edge rushers and pressures. That's just how far ahead he was in 2019. And that's in total pressures. Obviously, pressure rate tells a much more nuanced story. The one thing about pressure rate is that you do have to be careful with it because players that play a lot of snaps, enough to count for like stabilizing pressure rate, but not all the snaps, end up playing a lot of third down snaps and pass rush specific situations that will inflate the pressure rate numbers. So total pressures actually does have utility, even when you typically would want to use rate statistics. Either way, he was top 10 or top 11 or something along those lines in 2020. And then, of course, in 2021, he played 15 or so snaps, maybe 18 snaps against San Francisco or against New Orleans. And then in the playoffs, he played something like 19 snaps against San Francisco. So he didn't play all that often. You do get to pair him with Danielle Hunter. Hunter played 7 games for the Vikings. In 6 of those games, he had like a crazy good pressure rate. One of those games, which I believe is the game he got injured in, which is the one against Dallas, or was the one against, or it was the first one of the year, which was the one against the Bengals. He didn't hit those, but his 7 game sample is really, really good. And so the evidence would suggest to us that Danielle Hunter's pass rush capability was not impacted by his neck injury. That's about all we know. We don't know whether or not the pectoral injury has like a long-lasting injury. And so then the concern here is, are both of them going to be healthy? Because the Vikings don't have a ton of depth, because their depth is basically who they had last year. Now, Stephen Weatherly did just put out an Instagram story, and maybe by the time you're listening to this, he'll have announced something. But I don't know. He put out an Instagram story that he was in the Minneapolis airport, and he said "back at it" or something like that. I don't know, man. Minneapolis airport's a super popular airport. Maybe he's just like, hey, I've been in this airport a lot. But he did play for Ed Donatel with the Denver Broncos. So either way, I don't think that he is remarkable depth. I just like him as a person. But like he's probably not a huge upgrade over DJ Wonnum if he is at all. And I think you would hope that Patrick Jones or Janarius Robinson improve substantially. I guess one of them actually wasn't even available for much of the year because they were on NFI or IR or something like that. So I think that was Janarius Robinson. So you'd hope that one of them kind of steps up and stands out as a potential depth guy. But I am not as concerned, I think, about injury as it feels like we should be, right? Because they played like a combined 390 snaps or something small like that last year, if you include the postseason. But pectoral injuries have a lower re-injury incidence rate than a bunch of other injuries. And the injuries that you have to watch out for are the ones that are already compound of previous injuries. So, for example, like the lesson that taught me this was Ryan Matthews, who kept on getting collarbone injuries. And he was a running back for both the Chargers and the Eagles. And he was just this really great player. I remember from fantasy, he was so super useful to have because he was one of the few pass catching backs that was really good as a lead back. And he kept on getting collarbone injuries. And I'm following, these people with some medical training on Twitter, that pointed out that, if it's the same area of the body, then that is an injury concern going forward. If it's not, isn't necessarily. Depends on the type of injury. And, ankle injuries can increase the likelihood of a hamstring injury or a patellar injury of some sort as the other ankle attempts to compensate, right? And so, they're like compounding injuries that are related. But if you don't get injuries in the same part of the body, it's not really an issue where another injury increases their injury incidence. So Danielle Hunter had a neck injury, which sounds really alarming, and I think that that's fair, but he did play 7 games, and he played them very well. And then he had a pectoral injury, which is they're both upper body, but it's not the same injury. Za'Darius Smith had a back injury, and that's the only one I can think of that he had. And so while back injuries are a problem, and, I keep on saying on this podcast that Eric Stoner says that nobody used to have a bad back. There are NFL players that have returned to full form after sustaining a back injury. Adam Thielen is one of them, right? So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. I'm not that concerned about the injury situation any more than I would be about Eric Kendricks' injury situation, which, he's been injured a fair amount of times, or Adam Thielen's injury situation. I have a normal amount of concern, I should say, about that. And I would expect, because it's football, that one of them will miss a fair amount, maybe not a substantial amount, but a fair amount of games, and that's just going to happen. The concern, as always, is the depth. And so that's it. But I think that both of these players are really remarkable players, and that Za'Darius Smith probably should have earned a better contract. So probably a steal for the Vikings. A really good signing.
And the Vikings were also able to sign Jesse Davis as well.
Yeah, so he seems to be the only other starter that they've signed in this second wave. Now, obviously, they signed Jordan Hicks and Harrison Phillips in the previous wave. We talked about that in the last episode. And Jesse Davis is not going to be given the starting job, but I suspect that he's the favorite for the starting job over Oli Udoh, unless they draft a guard in the first 3 rounds. It doesn't sound like Wyatt Davis is currently in the mix, but I'm sure that he'll be given some sort of shot based off of what Kevin O'Connell said to Chad Graff at the owners' meetings earlier today. And recording this on Tuesday. When he was signed, I tweeted out the Vikings announcement. I had a couple of Dolphins fans, I think 2 in my Twitter replies and 2 in my DMs, essentially say, yeah, well, good luck with that, in a very pessimistic, he's not going to do anything for you. And I was like, well, great, good. I look at his PFF grades. I haven't watched him, so obviously that's important. But I looked at his PFF grades, and they were pretty bad. They were also better than Oli Udo's by not a small amount, which tells you how bad Oli Udo was.
I was about to say it. I mean, it's a positive there. It doesn't have to be much. Just a little bit better.
The problem with thinking about it this way, the problem with thinking about it as like, well, this is an upgrade, so that's a good place to be. The problem is basically anybody would be an upgrade, and you want your team to do better than autopilot, I think is kind of the approach here. Is that, yeah, they signed a guy who's better than Oli Udo, but they could have drafted that guy. That's not tough. They could have signed any number of guys who were better. So the challenge will be to determine why Jesse Davis struggled as much as he did. Now, he does not strike me as a zone guard. From what little I remember of his draft coverage, so I did watch him in college. I think he played for like Temple or something. And I remember he wasn't particularly fast, and his numbers aren't good either. Like a 5.26 40 or something like that, and really a slow 3-cone and like a 4.85 short shuttle or something along those lines. So I'm kind of surprised, but the challenge is, whether or not his struggles in Miami are related to the fact that he was forced to play essentially everywhere. And he played a bunch of snaps. He started a bunch. The Vikings want to rely on experience, which, I don't know, Dakota Dozier has experience, right? That's not like that useful. But he played like at left tackle after like some injuries in the Laramie Tunsil trade. He played at left guard. He played at right guard. I think he played at right tackle as well. So he played basically every spot but center, which like whatever, he played all of them poorly. But if the question is, did he play worse at tackle or guard? I only looked at his 2021 PFF grades, and it looked like he played about as bad at both guard and tackle. I would imagine that he's a better fit at guard, and that maybe you'll get a little bit more out of him there. But it's a $3 million signing. So the good thing about this is that like it doesn't prevent you from doing literally anything at the position. Like the Vikings are strapped for a cap, but they might have a little bit more cap space than you might think just from looking at like over the cap or spot track, which has them at 15.75 million of cap space. They say effective cap space is 11 million. I assume they're accounting for the draft class for that, which I think that calculation makes sense because the bottom half of the draft class won't count because of the top 51 rule. But they have more than that because it doesn't include the Adam Thielen restructure, which we'll talk about in a second. So they could, in theory, still go out and sign a guy to play guard if there's an option, or they could trade for a guy, if that market opens up for them. So this doesn't restrict them, but there are also just not that many guards out there on the market now anyway that would make you feel super optimistic about that take, but it is there.
So Sean Mannion is coming back, and
this one,
I
don't care. like it's just like I get it. It's annoying. You wanted to see a young quarterback be able to kind of develop and take the reins, and fine. But if Kellen Mond doesn't have it, he doesn't have it. So what are you going to do?
Yeah. The other thing is that it's not like Kirk Cousins spends a lot of time on the IR,
right? And so that's the thing is like Sean Mannion's only in the game if you're boned, right? Which is what happened against the most important team it could have happened against. But like Kirk Cousins only missed a game because of the COVID testing protocol, which, mind you, I'm saying this in the context that that's his fault, right? Like that's his fault. But like it does not tell us that he will continue to miss games in the future, right? It doesn't seem like he'll. I guess injury proneness is effectively an illusion. It's players are more injury prone than you think and less injury prone than you think. But like whatever, yeah. So among the backups, Sean Mannion is probably not in the top half. I don't know if you looked at a roster of backup quarterbacks, you might be surprised at how bad all of them are. So like, fine. But like, I don't know. He's not going to play. So like, a bunch of Vikings fans were mad that he got re-signed. Like, yeah, he sucked when he was on the field, but like, what are you gonna do, man? Like, most of them are gonna suck.
Yeah, Cousins is happy with him.
Yeah, and the sideline help, I'm sure, is not immaterial. Plus, I think the most appealing thing about Sean Mannion is that he definitely knows the offense because he played in LA for a little bit under Sean McVay. So great, fine, whatever. He sucks. It's fine.
He sucks. It's fine. Also worth mentioning is Chandon Sullivan.
Yeah, this is kind of like in the Jesse Davis arena. Well, he might be a little bit better, but this is in the Jesse Davis arena where it's like, yeah, he's an upgrade, I guess, kind of arena. The thing that was kind of weird to me is that like when he was signed, Justice and I think like one other guy, I don't know if it was like the Packer Report guy or Ross Uglum or another Packers guy reached out to me and they're like, yeah, this guy's not good. And I was like, okay, cool, he's not good, fine. Mackenzie Alexander is also like not good. Like this was, it's not fair because Alexander's coming off like the worst season of his career, but it might also be his last season because of it. He was much better with the Vikings the first time around, and he was a little bit better for the Bengals. And then now he just wasn't good last year. So I don't know really what caused that, and I don't know if the Vikings would have been able to revive it in a new defense. But it sounds like they weren't that interested in signing him back, so they signed Chandon Sullivan, who has kind of a relationship with Mike Pettin. So okay, fine. But he's like not good. He's just like most people that you bring in would have been better than what Mackenzie Alexander did last year. Which my projection for Alexander would have been just below average play. I don't think he would have played as poorly as he did last year. That's kind of an aberration in his career. But Chandon Sullivan has historically played better than what Alexander did last year. So there's that. But like a lot of slot corners would, the Vikings just need starting quality guys. This is technically one of those guys. He's not like, he's one of those guys that like every skill set he has is it's not in the worst class of that skill set that it could be. He does not have the worst instincts in the NFL. He's not have the slowest legs. He does not have, the most sluggish movements in short area quickness terms. He doesn't have like the worst height or the worst reach. He's like 5'11". He's got like 31-inch arms. It's just, there's nothing that brings him over the top either. His recognition is a little bit below average, right? Like it's like a bunch of stuff all at once where I feel like he should be quick and he just kind of isn't. And I think that they kind of rely on that. I think that this probably tells us that we're probably not seeing slot corners in this new defense carrying defenders deep all that often. I don't think that this resolves the Vikings problem, but they can't resolve all the problems that they have in one off season. And this is kind of like a make work. So the Vikings want to be competitive this year. And they've got 5 holes to fill. 3 are at cornerback, 2 are on the offensive line. Now, 2 of those are just below average, and so they won't be screaming liabilities.
That's really all you can hope for in this part of free agency.
Yeah,
just attempting to get some form of depth, maybe, and hopefully hopefully snag someone that may potentially see the field in December, maybe. Speaking of which, Ty Smith was also signed.
So yeah, he was in Vikings camp last year. He's been on a couple of rosters. I think he's been with the Titans and the Seahawks. He's had like 5 or 6 years in the NFL. And you don't always like see that kind of experience at the bottom end of a roster. But yeah, I mean, he's built kind of like an outside corner, but without all of the skills that you want there. So he doesn't have a ton of deep speed, for example. He doesn't have a ton of strength. He does have good quickness. He does have some arm length, and he does have kind of like a good knowledge of how to use that. And he's got like a pretty good instinct for like when to engage, like when to interrupt the receiver at the catch point, when to turn around and attack the ball and stuff like that. And so like he's like an aggressive player, but I don't know that he has got a lot of speed. I don't know that he's got a lot of technical capability, and I don't know that he's got a ton of strength. And so like a classic X receiver would give him a ton of trouble. But in terms of bottom of the roster players, I think you could do like a lot worse than him. So that's Ty Smith. And then they also signed Nate Hairston, who most recently was on the Colts, but he's bounced around the league for just a little bit. He's fine. He's not that good, but I've always thought of him as like a guy that would be kind of a zone corner that's been playing, or sorry, a man corner that's been playing in zone systems, and I don't know that he's been particularly good in those zone systems. So, um, yeah, like he's kind. I would say that he's a little bit scheme dependent. And I don't know that the Vikings are like the best spot for him, but I think in the modern NFL, there's not a ton of places that are the best spot for him. I just think that in terms of like passing off receivers in zone or maintaining the right depth in zone and stuff like that, he just kind of has an issue figuring out his spacing. But when he's in man coverage, he's got, like better instincts and stuff like that. So he's played in both press and off coverage, and he's looked fine in both. I just think that for the Vikings, if they want to get anything out of him, if he ends up making the roster, which, we don't know that he will, but it is a really weak cornerback group. So decent chance that he'll make the roster. They would need to make sure that he has a better handle on how to handle these zone assignments. But he's got like decent hands, at least kind of early in his career. And certainly he's good at like putting his hands in the right spot to create a pass disruption. So I kind of like him. He plays pretty tough, but I think the Vikings are in a good spot if their talent at corner is strong enough that he doesn't get to make the roster.
And a lot of this was possible because of the Adam Thielen restructure. And when the Thielen restructure was initially reported, there were some erroneous numbers that were out there. So what actually is going on with the Thielen restructure? What are the numbers involved?
Yeah, it's weird. So the restructure hasn't hit the transaction wire at all yet. And I guess it doesn't need to because the Vikings have enough cap space. But when it was initially reported, I think Field Yates reported that this frees up $6 million in cap space. I saw someone else say it frees up $5 million, although I don't know whether that one is attributed. Courtney Cronin, transitioning between the Vikings and the Bears beat, mentioned that this freed up $8 million in cap space. And so that was kind of weird. I saw some like contract projections that didn't make a ton of sense. And so finally, we got the contract projection. I think Tom Pelissero tweeted out a good chunk of it, and then we saw some more from like Field Yates and stuff. But it ended up getting reported as a $9 million signing bonus with a void year attached. And remember, the initial reporting of this said that there was no void year, which I think is funny as well. But there is a void year attached based off of the most recent reporting that we've seen. And so that $9 million signing bonus for cap purposes gets spread out over 4 years. But the total amount of money that Adam Thielen receives is $9 million plus his base salary, or base salary plus bonuses, which is $6.4 million, I guess, or $5.4 million based off of that math. And so if we add that to the cap hit from his bonus, which is, again, $9 million divided by 4 because of the added void year, that is or 7.7 million or so, which is a reduction in cap hit of 9.1 million. So it's actually not freeing up 5, 6, or 8 million, but potentially $9 million in cap space without necessarily having to change the amount of money that he's making next year or the year after that. We do know that that $5 million of his base salary next year is guaranteed. There's a good chance that is just a percentage of what his base salary is going to be or his total payout is going to be in 2022. Either way, that freeing up $9 million would allow the Vikings to go after a starting guard or a starting corner, maybe like Patrick Peterson or something. So that is not in spot track yet. That's not an over the cap yet. So the cap space that we see, which is 11 million effectively, 15 million, I guess, on paper, is not the total amount of cap space that the Vikings have to play with. So they do have a little bit more cap space to be able to make some signings and maybe shore up some of these holes.
All right, so the Thielen restructure happens, and I don't know. It seems weird that it's not like formally reported, not an OTC yet, but. Is there any other restructure that we should expect on the Vikings before training camp?
I don't know because they kind of went through everything. There was some talk, right, about Dalvin Cook restructuring. I don't think that's happening. He right now is the highest cap hit on the roster besides Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter, which obviously Danielle Hunter just got restructured, and Eric Kendricks. So. I guess Kendricks could potentially, be the subject to that. there's not a ton you could get out of it. His cap hit right now is $13.5 million because of a $9 million base salary, $4 million in prorated bonus. You could probably get out of like 5 or 6, maybe $8 million, depending on how aggressive you want to be pushing money down the road. And yeah, $8 million would be nice, but I think it's probably closer to $4 or $5 million unless you really want to screw up the 2024 cap, the 2025 cap. And that would be kind of the next area. But Dalvin Cook, you could probably say 5 or 6 of the restructure if you want to screw the cap down the road. And then after that, you've got like Brian O'Neill, who just signed a new deal. You're probably not going to do anything with that. Dalvin Tomlinson, probably not going to do much with that. They already did Harrison Smith. Garrett Bradbury's contract is fully guaranteed and only for 1 more year. You don't want to extend him. And so that's kind of where you're at, is that you've got those 2 or 3 people that you could potentially restructure, and there's not like a ton of juice to squeeze on that. There is a little, right? If you want to clean up $8 more million this year, you could do both, and then make 2024 or 2023 a little bit harder. But yeah, I don't know. The Vikings are in like a really weird, precarious spot for their 2024 cap because of all of this. Like if you just take a look at their 2024 cap liabilities, and a lot of this will end up changing, right? Like I mentioned, the Zadarius Smith stuff is like they're not going to pay him $21 million, right? Or they're not going to absorb that cap hit of $21 million. But the cap number for Zadarius Smith is $21 million. The cap number for Kirk Cousins is $12.5 million, which sounds great until you realize he's not under contract, right? That's just the cap number. Like, it's basically dead money. It's counted as something else, but it's dead money. Danielle Hunter has a cap hit of $11 million. Again, he's not under contract. That's just $11 million, right? Adam Thielen's cap number is $18.5 million. Brian O'Neill's cap number is $19 million. Dalvin Cook's cap number is $15 million. And obviously, not all of this is guaranteed, right? But Brian O'Neill, you can't do much. He's got you can't cut him, obviously. Why would you? He's good anyway. But he's got a significant amount of that guaranteed. And so it's hard to move that around. You would have to extend him, which I'm sure the Vikings would be happy to. Dalvin Cook has very little of that guaranteed. So you'd think that that's going to be something you could work around. Then obviously Adam Thielen is something you'd work around too. But with only 19 players under contract for, and then Dalvin Tomlinson is a $2.5 million cap hit, despite not being under contract for 2024. And so there's only 19 players under with a cap agency in 2024, but they consume, those 19 players consume $50 million. That all will be changed, but there's just so much here where you don't give yourself a ton of flexibility down the road. So that's kind of where the Vikings are. And so I don't know that unless they very much need to, they'll restructure Eric Hendricks any more than they already have. Or I guess Dalvin Tomlinson or something like that.
So today at the owners' meetings, there was a discussion about rule changes, and the Vikings were initially in favor of this until they voted against it, which I enjoy. So what exactly happened with the overtime rules for the playoff games?
Yeah, so it's only for playoff games, right, as you mentioned, which is kind of one issue I have with it. But it guarantees that both teams have a possession. Now, the way Chad Graff worded it, I don't know if that second possession is guaranteed to be untimed, but I guess the Vikings didn't want it to be. That's what I know from that tweet. But it essentially, the current rule is that the second team gets a possession if the first team does not score a touchdown, right? And that's basically the rule. So the first team scores a field goal, the second team gets the ball, and if they lose possession, they lose the game. So they have to kick a field goal to extend the game or get a touchdown to win the game. And if the first team scores a touchdown, that's a win. The first team gets intercepted. They no longer have an opportunity to score if the intercepting team scores. It makes sense as it plays out, but it always gets more complicated the more you explain it. Anyway, that second team is now guaranteed a possession. So if the first team scores a touchdown, the second team still gets to respond. If they are still tied at the end of that second team's possession, then it's sudden death. First team scores, wins. This creates a potentially interesting response scenarios. So like in the regular season, the coin toss winners only won half the time, which is kind of what you want ideally, right? Because you don't want outcomes shifted by something the players don't do. Literally coin flips, right? Like you could have a completely fair NFL game where at the beginning of the game you just have a coin flip and that team gets 100 points, and that's fair in one sense of the word, but it's not fair in another sense of the word. So you want players to control outcomes, right? And here, this would suggest that the winner of the coin toss doesn't win the game, unlike that example, but you still have 50-50 shot. So that's great. There's a lot of problems with the current overtime rule that, whatever, but the specific problem is that it favors offensive teams over defensive teams, which is why probably in the playoffs, 10 of 12 of the overtime winners had won the coin toss, which is wild, right? Because in the NFL, in the modern NFL, the offense defines outcomes much more than defense. And the thing I don't like about overtime, generally speaking, is that it doesn't become a whole team effort, right? Which, like, I understand, like, football has its moments where one unit is just going to end up mattering more than the other unit, right? Like a 2-minute drive, your defense just has to stop them. You don't get an offensive opportunity necessarily. But those don't occur in a vacuum if your offense is better at holding onto the ball, right? For example, you would, or if your offense scored more points. Like the whole, that construction exists within the whole of the game. Here it does exist in a vacuum. And so I don't really like it's fair because the opposing defense just needs to get a stop. Just get a stop. That's your job. It's football. And it's like, well, if your team is constructed as an offensive team, and you lose the coin flip, you're at a disadvantage because of a coin flip. And I don't love that. I don't love that it's not like the full team. And this kind of resolves that. But it still feels like it could potentially give an advantage to one team or the other. But which team it gives an advantage to, it seems interesting, is not agreed upon by the analytic staffers that are populating these teams. So Seth Walder tweets out, I reached out to a few current NFL analytics staffers to ask, given new postseason overtime rules, what's your instant reaction? Do you want the first or second possession? Now, before I give you their answers, and maybe you've already read them on Twitter, I do want to say that this is really interesting because it does not involve the use of analytics in a traditional sense. It's not using math with numbers. It's using logic, which a lot of logicians and a lot of mathematicians would tell you is math, and fine, it is, but without like numbers, right? And so they're asking analytics staffers to do something that they're kind of trained to do, but not the specific job that they're trained to do, to come up with an answer. It's more game theory, which I guess would be economics, but whatever. It's more game theory than it is math or statistics, right? Anyway, they reached out to analytics staffers. 2 of the 7 that he reached out to said that they would take the first possession. 3 of the 7 said that they would take the second possession. A 6 said it would depend on the quality of their defense. Here they mean their own defense. They would want possession second if they had a poor defense because they don't want to put their own defense in a situation where the opponent knows it must go forward on fourth down. This is an analytics staffer who's essentially saying teams should go for fourth down more often. And if they're forced to go for fourth down, that's good for that team that goes for it more often. And so they don't want the other team to make an optimal decision and go for it on fourth down. So if you score a touchdown and your own defense is bad, you don't want that defense to be put in a situation where the opponent is definitely going forward on fourth down. So that's what the 6th one said. The 7th one says, they now lean slightly towards the second possession, but noted that the options are close enough that they would more likely choose direction based on weather, and letting the opponent choose who gets the ball first and stuff like that. So I guess there's all of that. That's all out on the field. For me, I would absolutely want the second possession, and it's weird that this is like a huge debate, because I think knowing what you need to get is remarkably important, and that is what drives the whole, I guess the analytics on Twitter community calls it the down 8 test. When you score down 8, you score 6 points to go down 8. So you were down 14, you score a touchdown. Do you go for 2 or do you kick an extra point? And teams automatically usually just kick the extra point. And they say go for 2 because you need to know whether or not you need to go for 2 later. or something along those lines. Maybe it's down 13, right? Anyway, this is along those same circumstances because you need to know what you need to get so you can construct your strategy around it. So I would prefer to go second. At the same time, you could potentially make the argument that teams that need a field goal play worse because they play for the field goal. And there is some evidence of that, that it's better to be down 4 than it is to be down 3, which is very funny. But I think for the most part, if we think our team is generally playing optimally, I'd rather be down a field goal and go for it and know what I need. The first team doesn't know what they need. They don't know whether or not they have to go for it on 4th down, which changes your strategic probabilities, right? And so if you don't know whether or not you have to do something, you're less likely to do the most optimal thing. So if you know what your opponent is going to do the next drive and you know that they're going to score a field goal, then you don't have to put yourself in a situation where you have to go for it on 4th and 19. But if you know that they're going to score a touchdown, you do go for it on 4th and 19. And like you lose either way if you miss the 4th and 19, but you would have lost if you kicked that field goal. So I would prefer to know. I would go second. And I find it a little bit weird that they feel like it's that close. Either way, the thing that bothers me the most is that we have a different set of overtime rules for the regular season than we do the postseason. I just not like we already did, because if you tied at the end of regulation or tied at the end of overtime in the postseason, they would just keep going. And so technically that's different because you have a tie in the regular season. But these are a little bit different, even more so. And I can't explain like why I don't love that, but like I fundamentally don't like it if a sport has different rules in the postseason than the regular season. You're playing the same sport that should be played by the same rules. That's more of a feeling argument than it is anything, but that's just kind of my response to it. If you're guaranteed a possession, I think I'd rather go second. The appealing thing about the current overtime is that because you're not guaranteed possession, it is not clear whether or not you should take the ball or defend first. Now, people now always take the ball first because it gets them an opportunity to score a touchdown, and then the other team doesn't get to respond. But, that does depend on a little bit more on how good you think your offense is or defense is and stuff like that. And so the good teams that have good offenses in the playoffs have chosen to take the ball first and they score the touchdown. But like the 50-50 thing is kind of appealing, even though I didn't like the initial overtime ruling. Anyway, I don't know that the NFL will ever fix overtime. I really loved the idea put forth by Sam Schwartzstein, who ran a bunch of the XFL Rules Committee, former offensive lineman for Stanford, played in the NFL for a little bit, did a bunch of XFL rule stuff. And I just love the idea that the home team coach chooses a yard line and the away team's coach chooses whether or not they'll defend from that yard line or start from that yard line. That rules to me. It's just the splitting the cake thing. And I love it. You could also just have two coaches submit a yard line. One can only submit evens, one can only submit odds. And whoever submits the one furthest away from their opponent's end zone gets the ball first. These are fun because it puts the control back in the team's hands. And I just feel like these are just better because of that, rather than having a coin flip and trying to balance it out exactly.
So what you're trying to say is you believe that the real problem with overtime is that it's just not complicated enough. That we need to make these announcers who are earning way too much money really sweat and trip over their words when they're reading their copy.
No, this is way simpler. One coach chooses the yard line, the other one chooses to attack or defend. That's my preference. The one where it's like, well, if you get the ball first and you score a field goal, the other team gets to respond. But if you score a touchdown, no team gets to respond. But if they intercept it, any scorer gets to win now. And that's more complicated now than it is one team chooses the yard line, the other one chooses to attack or defend.
Feel like they should just have weapons on the field for this. Or, you know what? Not weapons. They should just have helmets that they can swing like a weapon. We've seen that before.
We've seen it live.
We saw it live. It was fantastic. All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is going to be from Bill Bodke, who asks, the offseason for the Vikings has been dominated by the discussion of two scenarios. The first is that the Vikings make the best of their situation with Cousins. The second is that the Vikings blow things up in order to draft a franchise quarterback. While we all find Cousins underwhelming, I argue the risks of the second scenario are under-discussed. The quarterbacks in the 2022 draft are underwhelming, and no team is likely to trade away their rights to CJ Stroud or Bryce Young in the 2023 draft. The Vikings are historically bad at tanking, so any QB drafted the next few years is likely to be a project. My question is this: are the odds of the Vikings making are winning the Super Bowl with Cousins really that much worse than drafting a quarterback who might only be third or fourth best in his class?
I don't like. So okay. So the question fundamentally is framed the way I think it should be framed, which is that we're looking at maximizing our odds of winning the Super Bowl, not maximizing the number of wins, because I think that is the automatic and totally justifiable instinctive way to look at it. What maximizes your wins? And generally speaking, keeping Kirk Cousins and not getting a rookie quarterback maximizes your wins. But maximizing your odds of a Super Bowl requires you having some chance of getting elite performances in the playoffs. They might need to be consecutive elite performances. They don't always have to be. You're not always playing against an elite quarterback either. But you need to make sure that your quarterback is the best player on the field for 3 or 4 consecutive games, right? Or has the best performance on the field for 3 or 4 consecutive games. So that's the goal. What are the odds of Kirk Cousins being the best performing quarterback on a field in a playoff environment for 3 or 4 consecutive games? Well, they're not very high. They're not high for anybody. But I would suggest that Cousins' odds of that are lower than a good quarterback from another draft class. And so the question then, of course, is, how good's that next quarterback? I think it's more likely than not you'll get worse, right? I think it's more likely than not you'll get a bad quarterback that is not as good as Cousins and you have to move on again. But at least you'll have moved on again, and you'll take another shot, and you'll take another shot, and you'll take another shot. And you're taking chances against something that originally your chance was not that high in the first place. So I do think that there's a good chance that these quarterbacks will be underwhelming. The thing is, you take a look at who the elite quarterbacks in the NFL are right now. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, obviously Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. And, unfortunately, probably Deshaun Watson, right? That's your group of elite quarterbacks. None of them were the first pick, if I'm remembering correctly, in their draft class. Deshaun Watson was picked after Mitch Trubisky. Patrick Mahomes was picked after Deshaun Watson. Josh Allen was picked after Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield. Tom Brady famously was picked 199th. Aaron Rodgers was picked 25th overall behind Alex Smith and I believe another quarterback, but I think he might have been the second quarterback in his class. This was way back in 2005, right? Now, I think that the first quarterback has the best odds. I think these examples are somewhat ahistorical, right? I think that the first quarterback in the draft has the best odds of being the best quarterback in that draft. I don't think that we should trust that the NFL consistently misevaluates. I'm bringing up these examples to demonstrate that a first round quarterback, which all of these except Tom Brady, I think are, a first round quarterback can still be good if they're not one of the first 2 quarterbacks in the draft class. Josh Allen was third. Patrick Mahomes, I think, was third. Lamar Jackson, if we wanted to bring him up, was drafted 32nd. He was 4th or 5th. I think he was 5th in his draft class. I think it was the Josh Allen class, right? So, having the 3rd or 4th best quarterback, if they are a first round quality quarterback, I think you're probably fine, right? Josh Rosen was the 4th quarterback in that class. He wasn't good, right? I'm not saying you're automatically going to get a 3rd quarterback that's good, but I don't think that you're out of the woods if you're getting the 3rd quarterback if they're a first round quality quarterback. So, and I've long argued that you want the first quarterback in a class, but if we're comparing the odds of winning a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins against the odds of maybe 2 or 3 draft classes where you only get the 3rd best quarterback, I would suggest that the 3rd best quarterback of their first round quality players is not only the more exciting option, but ultimately the more probable option. But I think that you're right that the risks of this scenario are under discussed. A lot of quarterbacks are just bad. The Vikings are not necessarily going to be good at getting that top pick. And teams generally don't tank. So that's fair. But I don't think we should be as concerned about the fact that these first round quarterbacks you might not get your pick of the litter of them. I think that that's fair, but I don't think it is an overwhelming concern in the scenario where we talk about blowing the Vikings up.
Raul asks, all signs point to a DB in the first round. Assuming Sauce is off the board, which prospect strikes you as the safest bet? Slow Kyle Hamilton, short-armed Trent McDuffie, or Derek Stingley, who has an injury / effort concern?
Okay, so these are all concerns that are legitimate and fair. And also it's very funny because we're like describing players that will almost assuredly go in the top 12. so like they're very quality players, but they all represent some significant risk versus reward. So Trent McDuffie, the short arm stuff, like my data does suggest that matters a lot once you account for a bunch of other factors, whether or not you account for draft capital or not. Having longer arms at cornerback, 32 or longer typically, correlates pretty strongly with a bump in performance, as much as any measurement can do, right? Because there's only so much you can get from measurables and 40 times and stuff like that. Derek Stingley, I think, is a tremendous player. I am not concerned that he was not that motivated in a 3-game season. I'm also not that concerned about the foot until I have a reason to be concerned. So I think that he is going to be very good. I think slow Kyle Hamilton is probably your safest bet because all of his other workouts suggest a very athletic, explosive player. And I think that his on-field play suggests a very rangy player. And for whatever reason, the way that he trained for the 40 doesn't reflect that. But he had elite jumps and elite agility. Like his 4 other workouts were extremely high. I don't know how to emphasize, extremely high level. And they would suggest a player that's more athletic than that 40 time does. And so I think based off of how he played in college, I think based off of these other workouts that provide us with data about his ability to kind of move, I think that he is probably the safest bet out of all of them. I don't know that the Vikings need a safety, but I think he would be the safest bet out of all of them.
Next question is from Tep, who asks, as the NFC QBs have dried up, it's a fun beginning of the sentence to say, I'm starting to feel better about Kirk. Does it seem reasonable that he could be, say, the 3rd best quarterback in the NFC?
All right, so if we assume that the rookie quarterbacks are not going to enter that conversation, which, fair enough, most don't. These are like the NFC quarterbacks you'd compare him against. Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, because he's returned, Kyler Murray, Matthew Stafford, Dak Prescott. After that, it drops off a cliff. Like if you just take a look at last year's passing numbers to see kind of who ranked above 16 and adjusted net yards per attempt, the NFC quarterbacks are like Russell Wilson and Matt Ryan, both of whom are now in the AFC. Doesn't matter. And then it's a ghost town all the way to 20. So it does drop off really significantly after that. I will say that. And maybe Justin Fields gets a lot better, right? There's opportunity for. I think Jared Goff was 20th actually, so that's where you're at. But Justin Fields is the one you have to be concerned about potentially presenting a challenge. Now, obviously, his level of play last year does not point to that, but he was a rookie, so that could all change. I don't know out of those 5 quarterbacks I listed, plus the possibility of Justin Fields, plus the possibility of a rookie. I don't know that Kirk Cousins is the 3rd best quarterback in that group. It really depends on what you think about the fact that Kyler Murray seems to tend to struggle in the second half of the season. It really depends on whether or not you think Matthew Stafford is a high-level quarterback or if you hold those kind of late-game shenanigans at the end of the regular season against him. I've made my argument for why if Stafford and Kirk are similarly skilled quarterbacks, you'd rather have Matthew Stafford. So I guess in that context, Stafford's a better quarterback. And then Dak Prescott, I just believe in more. I understand people's skepticism, so I won't argue that one. That's fair. But I just happen to think that he's a better quarterback. So no, I don't think that any of those 5 are worse than Cousins, but I think that you could make an argument about Murray, Stafford, and Prescott. I don't know that there are a lot of people that would make that argument for all of them. So for somebody that might be true, but for most people, some combination of those 5 quarterbacks are going to produce 3 that are better than Kirk. So if Kirk is the 4th or 5th best quarterback in the NFC, you're probably making the playoffs, except you're in a division with one of them. And that makes it a little bit more difficult. I don't know if that's how you want to, like, the goal is to win the Super Bowl, not the NFC Championship. Then Kirk gets to go up against Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or, I don't know, Ryan Tannehill or whatever. And then you have to think about that game, which, good problems to have, but like, I don't know, like big fish in a small pond. That's what you're happy about?
Well, Aaron Rodgers can't seem to recruit anybody to Green Bay anymore. So
that's true.
He's just hoping for a drop off there. I don't even know who the heck they're supposed to like be passing to over there anymore.
Alan Lazard.
I thought. It was Scantling that left. Mm-hmm. Lazard is still there.
Yeah, Lazard is. It's a very. I think he actually tweeted it out. The where did everybody go from Will Smith?
Yeah,
Fresh Prince. Somebody's been in the news.
Yeah. Famously, yes. Let's go to Andrew Schuba, who asks, the Vikings have seemingly won 2 Super Bowls this offseason by signing Smith and Sullivan. How do we Vikings fans keep from being spoiled?
A common question I get. How do you keep Vikings fans from feeling spoiled all the time? Yeah, no, for sure. Sorry, it's the Packers, so of course you win Super Bowls. Now, of course, the Packers do get to subtract those. Remember, it's not their Super Bowls. They don't get a Super Bowl, but they get to subtract surplus Super Bowls if they have signed any former Vikings. And I don't think they have. Do you? Do you know if they have?
No, they don't. They don't subtract. It's more like one of those things. Like it just sort of manifests. As far as these trophies are concerned, it's weird.
Well, so what I mean is, like, if the Vikings beat the Packers, they get a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. If the Packers beat the Vikings don't get a Super Bowl, but the Vikings, I guess they don't lose a Super Bowl, so I guess you can't really treat it like a compensatory free agency. So yeah, the Vikings would just get Super Bowls regardless of how many Vikings the Packers sign, I guess.
Yeah, this is the way. This is how this works. From time immemorial. Longtime listeners of the show know that this is how you get Super Bowl trophies. You don't win them during the season. You win them during the off season.
No, but you do win them against the Packers. So okay, so since the beginning of the 2021 season, the Vikings have won 3 Super Bowls.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Okay,
that's way more than Aaron Rodgers has.
Yeah,
that's
just within a calendar year. That's against Rodgers' whole career of 1 Super Bowl? 3? Wow.
Those are rookie numbers that he's working on there. Ed Donatello asks, what are 3 nice things you have to say about Kwesi and Kevin regarding this offseason so far?
I've mostly been complimentary. It's just my most recent article was less than complimentary. So the first thing I'll say about their off season, so I don't get to talk about like them as people, I guess. I don't know. Is I really like how available Kwesi Adofo-Mensah makes himself to the media so that he can talk about what moves that they made, what their thought process was. There's a level of transparency that we did not get from the Spielman era. And I think that's really cool. It gives us a lot to write about. Even if in his availabilities he doesn't seem to be saying much, which is what I criticized in the last availability. I'm glad I had it because we could talk about it and we get some insight into what he's thinking, right? I'll say this about Kevin O'Connell. He is very excited to talk about X's and O's off camera. He's very excited to walk you through kind of his thought process. He's excited to talk to you about kind of what the vision for the team is going to be and kind of what the plans are and kind of how he sees football. So that's really exciting to me as a journalist. Then I think together, I'll say that they definitely have a very forward-thinking and coherent vision for how they should build a franchise. Now, I don't agree with the way that they've directed that vision or the way that they've directed their philosophy. That's clear, right? But I do think that they have a good understanding of the importance of process, which I think is really critical. And I think that leads you to make better decisions in the long run. So I really like that from them. And it does result in some decisions that are probably going to be ones that are praised, because I do like, for example, the fact that it seems very likely the Vikings will throw the ball a lot more, right? I think that's smart and good. And so those are, I think that's three nice things I have to say about them.
Next question is from Legend of Korra, who asks, what convinces you it's not more of the same with Kwesi and Kevin? We got a couple of these, so let's keep it going.
All right. Nothing yet, except the things I said. Which is like fine. I think the things I said are big, but like, yeah, so far it very much seems like a team that is doubling down on what they had, and what they had got the last coach fired with a 45 record or 454 record over the past 2 seasons. So I don't love it. I know that there are people that don't like Chad's most recent piece or my most recent piece that talk about how their moves are bigger than they seem. And, maybe, but that's like more injury than it is. Like, if the Vikings perform well this year, if they make the playoffs this year, it won't be because of the moves they made. It's either because of the coaching staff that they have, or because they benefited from injury luck in a way that they didn't last year, which you didn't need a new coaching staff for that. So I don't know. We'll see. But hopefully in 2 years, we'll have a much clearer vision of what will happen going forward.
Dustin asks, is there some Wall Street equivalent to inflating the value of the assets you currently have in order to sell high later that Cam could be attempting to replicate with doubling down on this middling roster? Also, All20Q asks, please explain Kwesi's offseason plan in terms of the GameStop stock bubble. Thanks. So I don't think that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is running a pump and dump scheme with the players that are on the roster. I don't know if there's like a lawsuit we can get involved with as far as an app is concerned for tricking us or locking us out of this.
Instead of Robinhood, it would be DraftKings, right? Like instead of, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So pump and dumps are, of course, illegal in the financial market. That has hit Elon Musk a couple of times. But yeah, you can't artificially boost the price of a stock, etc. There's like a bunch of regulations. I'm describing it poorly. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So maybe Adofo-Mensah is artificially pumping up the value of particular players on the Vikings roster in order to sell them. But the thing is, the trading window in the NFL is very limited and small, and so you would have to time the pumps for the dumps to work correctly. And if that's the case, that's clearly not what the Vikings are doing. So they would have to, right before the beginning of the season, begin to increase the value of the players in the roster through pump and dump mechanisms like me, I guess. I was going to say the media, but I realized that that's just me. Or near the trade deadline, which is like week 8 or week 10 or something. And then, if they start pumping up the value of the players around week 10, they're screwed, right? So right now, I don't think that that's what's happening, but really appreciate the creative thinking from those two questions.
I just don't, this is just, it's silly. The idea, and the only thing going through my head is 80s guy in the Futurama episode. just imagining Kwesi doing that. His only regret is having bonitis. Kyle asks, Ben Baldwin published a chart with the Vikings ranked 29th behind the Bears in expected pass protection for 2022. Bradbury has been dreadful in pass protection, but how can a line with 3 average to good linemen be so bad? Is this your expectation? Is this fixable?
So this is kind of funny because he ended up tweeting out 2 charts, both of which put the Vikings pretty low. The first chart put him at 27th. The second chart put him at 29th. And the reason is because he didn't adequately account for, I guess, stars returning from injury like for Baltimore and Green Bay. But the thing that really strikes me about this chart is that the Dolphins were ranked 24th, and now they rank 9th. And that just seems like wrong. Like, I don't know, like the Dolphins just have bad pass protection. All the Tua jokes that I made that, well, I guess between them, they maybe he's accounting for Teron Armstead in a huge way, and like, and he gets to return from it, and that like has a big impact. But if that's the case, if Teron Armstead has that big of an impact, I mean, the Dolphins still have Michael Dieter, Robert Hunt, Liam Eichenberg, plus they signed Connor Williams, who's probably not ranked remarkably high in Baldwin's expectations. So if that one player can move them, maybe Connor Williams is included. If that one player can move them from 24th to 9th, why wouldn't the Vikings with 3 good players be ranked higher than 29th? And what's great is that Baldwin tweeted out pass protection grades expected for the 2022 Minnesota Vikings. And one thing that you get kind of off the bat is that Ezra Cleveland and Christian Darrisaw aren't good. They're average. Actually, Ezra Cleveland here is ranked a little bit below average. And that is the expectation based off of like the PFF data. Now, Garrett Bradbury is awful and Jesse Davis is bad. And so that hurts you. But the only kind of elite player here is Brian O'Neill, which, makes sense. Everyone kind of acknowledges that he's a very high level player. Okay. Still, that's like kind of funny because like the Dolphins were 24th and then 9th. Maybe you got some more players returning from injury, like maybe Liam Eichenberg didn't play the whole season or Robert Hunt didn't play the whole season, which actually I think Robert Hunt didn't, so that might have played a role. But like it is kind of strange. But like I think that what matters here and what this demonstrates is that it is not the quality of your best players, but the quality of your worst players that matters. Because I think Garrett Bradbury is worse than anybody who's projected to start for the Dolphins. And Jesse Davis, this could be an addition by subtraction for the Dolphins, might be the same way, that he might be worse than any of the players that are projected to start for the Dolphins. Maybe there's a reason that Connor Williams is replacing him. Plus, that means they get Austin Jackson off the field. So we've talked about this in the past, where pass protection seems to be a weakest link sort of position, where the difference between average and great is smaller than the difference between awful and average. And so you would rather have a bunch of 16th ranked linemen at their positions than one that's ranked first, one that's ranked 32nd, one that's ranked 64th, and another one that's ranked first, or whatever, right? And so that's kind of probably driving some of this in terms of pass protection efficiency. So that's my guess on that. But, the draft will change things.
Next question is from Josh, who asks, who are 3 people in the draft who would provide a reasonable competition or upgrade to our interior O-line that you think would be worth taking according to positional value?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the interior offensive line, I would probably wait outside of the first 2 rounds. I know that I talked about how big that need is, but I think that in terms of the quality drop-off you get from the first to second to the third round, that it is not that's significant, right? Because remember, Garrett Bradbury was a first round player. Elton Jenkins and Eric McCoy were third round players. I think both of them went in the third round. Maybe Eric McCoy went in the fourth. That's obviously, again, generally speaking, the best players will go first. So I'm not saying that you'll get better players in the third round. I'm just providing an instructive example of players that went later that, you might think are kind of worth it, right? So I don't know that the Vikings should invest a first round pick at these positions. I think that the first 2 picks, barring something strange happening, right in the second round, you see Malik Willis, go for it. But I think that they should probably be cornerbacks because of positional value, which leaves you in a pretty odd position when it comes to guard. That's I guess the thing that Jesse Davis allows you to do, although I still would consider that a need even with him there. But I would say that the third or fourth round would be probably the best option. So I was looking through, in response to this question, the Grinding the Mocks database, which does get iffy around the third round because what it does is it aggregates all the mock data from around the internet and produces an expected draft board. It's very similar to the consensus board in that way. And I've talked to the Benjamin Robinson. I've talked to him, the owner of that website and the owner of that data, for years now. I mean, we both respect each other's projects a lot. But one of the issues is that it gets tough because not many people produce mock drafts that go through the third round, especially fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round. Which the advantage of it, of course, is that he has his available all year, and mine's available like a week before the draft. So there's something very useful there, and I'm using it because of that. But yeah, so just like as an aside, if these players don't seem like they're going there, that is not his fault. So that's just kind of important. If you think that these players should be going somewhere else, sorry, I'm just using kind of the data that was provided, and he's just using the data that's available. So the 3 players that I isolated as potential third, fourth round prospects that also fit the Viking system in terms of athleticism and what the Rams have historically done at the position and what the Browns have historically done at the position. Because remember, Kwesi also comes from the Cleveland Browns, and they run a zone system under Kevin Stefanski. So I figured if I looked at the players that kind of fit the requirements there, you'd find kind of some zone-capable guards that fit, and 3 popped out. One was Ed Ingram from LSU, another was Dylan Parham from Memphis, and another was Cole Strange from Chattanooga. My understanding of these players is that Cole Strange is a tackle guard capable, and that Dylan Parham is potentially center guard capable. And that Ed Ingram, I guess, is just a really good guard. All 3 of these players have very similar scouting reports. They all moved as well as the testing numbers indicated. They all had a little bit of trouble when asked to pull in space, not necessarily when they were asked to block at the second level as zone players. They all demonstrated some level of lateral quickness, and they all had some issues with strength of some sort. It was different for some than others. I think Ed Ingram, for example, had issues with lower body strength. I think Dylan Parham had some issues with core strength, and you treat those a little bit differently in how they kind of deal with certain types of players and how you evaluate what that means for the draft. I think Cole Strange may have also had some issues with sub-package pass rushers and stuff like that. The hand placement wasn't great for him. So these all have differences that make them unique in the scouting reports, but the fundamentals that they are zone-capable guards that look like they can move up to the second level and seal things off and are adequate in pass protection but don't have an overwhelming amount of strength, those are all kind of universal among those 3. So those are the players I would probably target according to kind of the mandates of, the Vikings need and the positional value within that draft. It does sound like that area will have a lot of offensive linemen that could potentially fit that mold available. And so from a draft depth perspective, it also makes sense. Like, yeah, you could draft Zion Johnson. And I did in the most recent kind of offseason plan that I sketched out. I drafted Zion Johnson and ignored cornerback just because I wanted to see what would happen. And I think that he's a tremendous player and that he'd be fun to watch. He's the guard he's one of the 2 guards, rather, out of Boston College that declared for the draft. And I think that he is pretty clearly the best player in the class. Kenyon Green, Texas A&M, is another first-round guard. His testing numbers don't indicate that he would be a great fit for what the Vikings do, nor, in my opinion, does his on-field play. But, he's mean, he's decent in pass protection, and he certainly has done a lot to earn accolades as a potential first-round guard, but I just don't think he fits what the Vikings do. Those 3, I think, from a positional value perspective, are a little bit better in where they're going to be drafted than Zion Johnson at like 12 or something crazy like that.
Next question is going to be from Skull Hio, who asks, Kyle Hamilton at 12 if he falls there?
I don't think that's the greatest use of draft capital, just because I think that the Vikings have a tremendous hole at cornerback, and they're probably fine at safety. But if the Vikings did it, I would understand it, right? Like if they scouted him and they thought he's as fast on the film as he is going to be in the NFL, and that the testing numbers did not tell you everything about him, and they projected essentially a 4.41 140 or something like that, I get it, right? Because they would just be like, look, you can't get elite players all the time. We'll figure out how to put Cameron Bynum on the field. And maybe they will, right? So I don't think I would overly criticize them for it, but it is not the move that I would make. He's one of my favorite players in the draft class, though. So I can't hate it too much. And certainly if I'm on the board, if I'm the general manager and he falls there, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about it. So that's tough. I like him a lot. He's fun to watch.
Burrito Bill asks, this offseason, we have seen a number of players signing to teams in part due to relationships on that team's coaching staff. How much of a correlation is there between quality production and these relationships for vets, and should this be seen as a factor when signing a player?
So I think it is more about coaches and players knowing how they'll be using that player or being used by that coach than it is, this coach is going to get the most out of me. I think it's a familiarity thing in terms of I don't have to change my scheme in order to accommodate this player. I know exactly what he's going to do, or like I don't need to make adjustments halfway through the season, right? I know exactly what this player is, and then with the player, they already know where they stand with the coach, because with the new coach, you never know where you stand, especially if you're not a star player that's like signing for the most money in the world. So I think that that's a big part of it, and I think it's actually driven more by players than it is coaches at the top of the signing amount than it is for the players kind of at the bottom of like their contract amount. I think the players at the bottom generally get more or better or more immediate offers from coaches that they know. I think players at the top choose to go to coaches that they know, just because like the reason I'm one of the top players in the NFL is because I played well, and I played well because I played for this coach. And so like that like follows, right? So I think that kind of drives it. I don't know that there's an enormous relationship, but I think players are always worried about like a unique Ngakoue situation, right? Where, Ngakoue plays well. There's a new coach. He's not playing well for the Jaguars. Then he gets traded to the Vikings. He's not playing well there. Goes to the Ravens, does okay, not that well. And then goes to the Raiders and he's having a good season again. And so for a player like that, you'd very much would want to attribute that to the coach, right? Because it's like psychologically a little bit more comforting to say, well, I just wasn't used right. So I think that players are scared of that, right? But yeah, I don't know that there's an enormous relationship. It's just that there's like always these kind of scenarios where like, oh yeah, I remember when like a potential Hall of Famer Richard Seymour was cut from the Patriots, or traded for a first round pick. I should have traded from the Patriots to the Raiders, and he just wallowed with the Raiders. He just wasn't good there. The same thing with, I guess, Warren Sapp, which I think may have also been the Raiders. Maybe I'm mixing up my stories, but defensive end / defensive tackles going to another team playing out of position. Albert Hainsworth, everybody thought that he would be a 3-4 nose tackle because of his size, but he really was not. And he just couldn't play in a system that had him as a 3-4 nose tackle. These examples are so common in NFL history that the broad relationship between relationships and performance probably doesn't matter as much as these like very vivid memories for people. Like Chandler Jones has switched positions a ton of times and he's been fine, right? Like there's dozens of examples of that, but people are like, well, Odell Beckham was in the wrong system and now he's an elite receiver again. Like, okay, sure.
Also from Burrito Bill, what vibes would a Kirk Cousin mullet give off, and would it make him better at football?
So he included a picture of Kirk Cousins in a mullet.
Well, this was something that I asked the Discord to do because I couldn't picture it.
Oh my God.
And so someone in the Discord put this together, and it is haunting.
It's terrifying. And also it was done very well. My congratulations to whatever monster did this.
It hurts. It hurts so bad.
So the worst part about this is I was like, oh, did someone actually drop that picture in the Discord? I've got Discord closed because I don't want notifications going off during the recording of the show. So I was like, James, can you just like move him from the Discord into the Google Doc? And so I was like looking up like, in answer to another one of the mailbag questions that we got. And I've got the show notes open, but I don't have it quite open to this question. And then James drops the picture and it takes up the whole freaking page. I just got this giant, we'll put it in the show notes at Daily Norseman. I've got this giant picture of Kirk Cousins staring at me with a mullet. And my God.
The eyes just really bore into your soul. There's no other way to put it.
I'm ready to put some rocks in some tubes, man. I was seeing death.
This is a special thanks to user Bridge Over Teddy Water for this one. This was impressive. This hurt.
Is he? Do you know if right now he's a B racist?
He's not currently listed as one. No.
Okay, I was gonna if If he was, I was going to take him off the list just for this. So he's got one B word pass.
But really, this picture just really sums up. I like how that's currency. That's currency where we're at.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Just looking at this picture, it looks like a guy who could have made state. They could have made state that year.
Yep,
and uses a van non-ironically. Like, not like he has the van for other reasons than, he's
like
driving
a bunch of kids or whatever. Right?
Yeah, like he has the van. He may actually have a band image art spray painted on the side of it. He may be driving
at one
vans.
point, and that point maybe right now, there is carpeting on the back of the van. It could have happened in the past. Maybe he's removed the carpeting to create better storage. But at some point, there's carpeting at the back of the van. He's
probably had his mail delivered to a bar because he didn't have an address to send it to. And it was just easier to do that way.
So unquestionably, Kirk Cousins would be better at football. Okay. So here's the thing. So the reason Kirk Cousins is as good as he is because he pays so much attention to detail, that he works incredibly hard, that he studies football, like it's his job. It is, but studies football like to a tremendous degree. It has made him a very rigid quarterback, but you wouldn't have gotten here if he did that. So we have to imagine a Kirk Cousins that has all of that football knowledge put into the body of a guy who is got the physical capability of Kirk Cousins, but is also the type of guy that would grow a mullet.
And possibly,
that guy is good as hell.
And possibly steal your catalytic converter.
Right, yeah. I mean, dude, how else is he going to feed his kids?
That is the face of someone with at least one outstanding warrant.
Yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't want that guy at quarterback.
Yeah,
so long as he knows enough about football and he's got the athleticism of a quarterback and the arm of a quarterback and all that, you want that guy throwing deep. Absolutely.
And that is totally not his kid. Christopher Wiley asks, to be honest, I loved Za'Darius coming out of Kentucky and thought he flashed more than Bud Dupree, but this doesn't get me past how dislikable I find Kirk Cousins to be. Knowing Kirk is here for 2 more years, I stopped following the draft. What should I hope for on draft day?
This question took me for a loop when I first read it.
I just looking at that something else interesting is on TV.
I just I can't break down the sentence. I love Za'Darius coming out of Kentucky, but this doesn't get me past how dislikable I find Kirk Cousins to be. And in my head, I'm just like, no correlation. This what are you talking about? What? I think I get what he's saying, which is that because Kirk Cousins is fundamentally unexciting to Christopher Wiley, that he just can't get excited about the season. If he can't get excited about the season, then he can't get excited about the draft. And that Za'Darius Smith was not enough for him to overcome that. In which case, I don't know, man, you don't have to watch the draft. James basically said that, but it's my job to watch the draft. Fans can opt in or out, man. I'm not going to convince you to watch this. But in terms of a hope for, I guess for Malik Willis to fall to the second round and for the Vikings to draft him or anybody, right? Actually, I cannot get behind Kenny Pickett. But any of the other first round quality quarterback, because I don't think 5 are going in the first round, but there's 5 that are rumored to be first round quality guys, like Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett, and I've just not been paying attention to the quarterbacks this class. But Matt Corral, I still don't know how to pronounce his name, and I was just around a bunch of draft guys pronouncing his name. Sam Howell, and I'm sure there's a 5th guy. There's got to be the way people were talking about the draft. So. One of those guys falls to the second round. The Vikings draft him. I don't know. That's exciting to me. That guy might not be good, but that's a good storyline. There's always hey, Kirk Cousins lost that game. Maybe it's time for, Sam Howell to get a shot, right? That seems like that's fun, right?
Yeah.
It may not be good team building, but it's fun. So that's what you should hope for on draft day if you're hoping to get excited about the team.
I mean, You don't have to watch the draft. I know personally, for the second year in a row, I'm on a vacation during the draft, during the day of the draft. So
Excellent.
that's just I'm going to a concert in North Carolina. I'm out of town. Like I'll catch up with it on Twitter as it happens, but otherwise I'm in North Carolina for that. I'm not dealing. Which is also to say, if there's any listeners in the Raleigh area with any suggestions for things I should do while in the Raleigh area, let me know. I'm curious. I'm going to hit up as much roadside barbecue as I physically can. But let's go to Dimitri, who asks, how is Arif feeling about Seattle's chances after moving on from Wilson?
I don't follow the Seahawks, but I got to imagine that's not good. They're not in a good spot.
They still have DK Metcalf at the moment.
Good for DK Metcalf. Is it Geno Smith? I clearly don't follow the Seahawks. Like, who do they have at quarterback?
They got Drew Lock.
Oh, if they trade for, I'm so dumb. Yeah, they traded for Drew Lock. Dope. No, they're set. They're
good. they're fine. What could possibly go wrong? You have Drew Lock at your quarterback. What else could you possibly need?
Also, they don't even have Geno Smith. He's a free agent.
He's
Jacob Eason.
He is out in the ether. Gerald asks, what do you think the Minnesota Vikings NFTs will look like when they start a season with a lackluster offense? JJ is upset. Kirk is checked out. Bradbury is being thrown into the seats every down. Our patchwork defense is giving up 28 points plus a game, and seats aren't being filled.
What do I think the NFTs will look like? If JJ's upset, then it's going to be NFTs of Justin Jefferson doing great stuff, and then they'll gift him some. He's into NFTs, or he's going to be. So
makes sense. I think that what you really should do is just embrace the chaos portion of this, and just do a Vikings terrible seasons history.
Okay, so that would rule, but the Minnesota Vikings are such a brand conscious organization. They're so corporate in the way that they brand themselves and the way that they handle their socials and all this. So they would just never do it.
Well, no, they would never do it, but I would still, you know what? I would actually pay for an NFT of a McNabb worm burner or the Josh Freeman launch into space.
That would rule. An NFT of the 2005 season. I don't know what that looks like, but that rules.
NFT of the little cart wheeling away during the collapse of the Metrodome.
Oh, I might actually pay for that. Oh my God.
I would consider that.
I think everybody might have one thing where they're like, yeah, I'd get an NFT of that. There's so many people hate NFTs for so many good reasons. They don't get it. It's a digital image on the internet or whatever, right? It makes sense not to be super into NFTs. Most people aren't, right? And a lot of people, I don't know about most, but a lot of people think that they're super stupid. But there's got to be one thing for everybody where they'll be yeah, I think I'd pay for an NFT of that. Maybe they won't pay $1,000, right? I'm sure that there's.
Oh no, I'd pay $3.50 for for the one where the kids are playing the mascots on the field. and just jacked up the kid. And the kid goes flying sideways. I would totally, you know what? That's worth $3.50 to me. I would.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. I'd pay something. I wouldn't pay the way the NFT market is characterized in terms of prices. But there's something I'd pay. I own, I own Brett Favre's last snap.
Oh, boy, pre-concussion or post? Oh, I got them as a matching set.
And when you get him as a matching set, you get a reward. The third one is him in an Atlanta Falcons uniform.
Oh God, really? That's let's move on. I can't. I'm done. Nolan asks, how will the Browns trade shake up the power balance in the NFL? Case to the Bills seems like a growing power imbalance. Also, Jesus. Question for Arif's Harry Potter corner, aka Diagonal Route Alley. Is Julian Edelman Tom's latest Horcrux?
So the Horcrux theory here is that like Rob Gronkowski was a Horcrux, and I don't know that how a Horcrux was applied in the series applies to the way the Buccaneers are building the roster. But the rumor is that Julian Edelman will sign with the Bucs because Tom Brady was seen working out with Julian Edelman. That's not happening. No way. I don't believe it. Gronk, retired, loves retirement, is also Gronk. Like, he's everyone's favorite dumb friend. So, like, yeah, okay, he'll play football if it's his friend.
He really wants to get on that insurance too,
and he just really wants to get on that insurance.
Like,
Julian Edelman, he just wants to sell you Mike's Hard Lemonade or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, what's he selling? Some drink,
something. But more importantly, can we please just get him honorary military status? He wants to be a part of this so badly.
Yeah, I think. I can't imagine that the military would be too bothered with the integrity of earning a captaincy. They just Gronk is like too old to enlist, right? Like, there's no way. Yeah, okay.
Can he just get like an honor? Like, if he does commencement at a military organization for like the graduation,
it's like, instead of an honorary degree, he's an honorary officer in training,
just to get those commercials off the TV. Can we just arrange that?
No, the worst part is, if that happened, he would still do the commercials. He'd just be talking about how great it was that he got the insurance, and everyone would be like, what? And the entire Gronkowski family gets to, because you gave a speech?
Yep, that's how privilege works, Arif. I don't know if you knew that, but this is how it goes. Joe Cool asks, Mug or Barks? Over the past 2 weeks, a fake Twitter account announced that the Vikings had chosen an official root beer for the team. That is not actually the case, but it has managed to tear Twitter asunder as far as the Vikings are concerned. So, which do you prefer, Mug or Barks?
This is also like, Mug has been like a trend for some reason, like even before this, because I saw it in like one of the Discord servers I'm in, and I saw it unrelated to football. And I saw it like on TikTok, and it's just like a thing. I don't know why. And I don't know, like, I guess the funny thing is that it's Mug root beer, but like, okay, so first of all, the worst root beer I've ever had is Virgil's root beer. Sorry. It's like a small root beer company. I don't want to put them on blast, but I just don't like it. Then the second worst is Barks. So there's no way that I would choose Barks. But like, I don't know how, like, if you know this, James, but I used to be super into root beer, like crazy into root beer. Like, I would go out and I'd try to find all kinds of like novelty and specialty root beers from literally across the country. And so when people started doing this mug posting thing, which is what it's been called, I was like losing it. Of all of the mass manufactured root beers, I guess you probably can't count 1919, although it's like in that Sam Adams category, where it's like not, you don't really feel comfortable calling it a small root beer company like Sam Adams. You don't feel comfortable calling it a small beer company, but it's also like not one of the major companies, right? And I think 1919 kind of fits in that role. Of the major ones, I think A&W is probably the best. But like, honestly, like, all of these craft root beers are just so worth trying. Northern in Minnesota is really great. The Killebrew in Minnesota is pretty good. There's a Wisconsin kind that uses honey instead of cane sugar that I actually do like a lot. I didn't think I would like that one. My favorite ever, I think it's been discontinued. I think was produced somewhere in like Washington, which of course is Bulldogs. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like, try like some of these strange, like very small batch, I guess is the way to say it, root beers, because like the thing about like Coca-Cola and its and like all of its competitors and all of its generics is that they all try to taste like Coke. Whereas with root beer, that's not really the case. They just kind of want to taste a little bit like sarsaparilla. Like, that's kind of what they want to taste like. I did have a really good experience drinking something called Dad's root beer, of all things.
Yeah, that one is actually really good, surprisingly.
Yeah, it's really good, and I think it's up there. But the best experience I had was actually having it on tap, of all things, on tap at a root beer bar in Northfield, which cannot possibly still exist. But I don't know, man. I'm sure there's some listeners here that live in or have very recently lived in Northfield. If that still exists, let me know, because that place ruled. So yeah, it's probably my best root beer experience, but like the best root beer I've had coming out of a bottle was probably Bulldogs. So those are my thoughts on root beer, which are surprisingly deep.
When I was DJing wedding events and I was having to drive all over areas and like in remote places, I would end up doing the same thing where I'd pick up some obscure root beer thing and just hoping that it was decent, and a lot of times it wasn't. But I'm also a cream soda person, so I'm immediately eliminated and need to be exiled and fired out of a cannon, according to these people. So just wanted to come out of that closet. Ryan asks, given that we've been through army recruitment, the root beer wars, and untold other shenanigans this offseason, has Vikings Twitter finally reached the need for a Prop 65-esque warning label? My answer to this is no, but Luke's Discord does. So we should probably just do that instead.
Yeah. It's unhealthy. Don't go to Luke's Discord. I would say go to ours, but like you have to pay us to do that. So yeah, go to ours.
Luke comes to ours for respite, for rest. Like,
which, given how we treat him, tells you a lot about his Discord.
So that's worth mentioning. Ryan asks, for a Reef's Teddy corner, does Miami's GM think QBs work like Voltron or Franken QB? Was he intending to combine his top two quarterbacks to have two legs and the average NFL arm?
I think the appealing thing is you don't have to change your offense when you go from Tua or Teddy or vice versa. It's just like, yeah, we're running a lot of slants. What are you going to do about it?
Let's go to Luke Braun's dad, who asks, what do you dislike most about my son?
All right.
I mean, likely it's not really Luke Braun's dad, but on the off chance that it is.
Of course. I want to answer this seriously, so I'm just going to let it. All right. Luke Braun's dad. Can I call you that? Luke Braun's dad? I want to be completely honest. It's his face. His stupid, ugly face. And the reason it's his face is because it reminds me of all the other things I dislike about him. The thing that gets my blood boiling is his face. But the thing that makes that happen is the way he thinks, the way he acts, the way he posts, and most of all, the way he lives. God, I cannot stand that guy. Editing YouTube videos for a living. What kind of living is that? Making 30-minute podcasts every day. Brutal. The worst takes. And the smugness to look at himself in the mirror and smile. Awful. What's the next question?
Well, the next question's for me, so we'll let you recover from that. The gaming nerd on our Discord asks, for James's food corner. Sorry, I'm shook on that one. How warm does it have to be outside before you consider it warm enough to grill? Additionally, what's the first thing you like to make on the grill when it's finally warm enough? Second answer first, steak. I'll just break out steak. That's what I did last weekend. It was steak. Or the weekend before that, actually. How warm does it have to be? Above. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be above 32, but I prefer between 35 and 45. That will get me outside. It's not good enough for the smoker, but this is also why I have a propane grill. It's like the only reason is because sometimes it's just too damn cold to try to smoke something outside in North Dakota. It doesn't work like it. So you have to do it like this. So I did steak somewhere between 32, 35, and 45. Would be the suggestion. Kevin asks, when flying out of Minneapolis, what's the best place to eat at in the airport before your flight?
So I haven't because I'm flying out of Minneapolis, I'm usually trying to spend as little time in the airport as possible. And obviously, when I land, I try to leave and go home. So I actually don't spend that much time eating in the Minneapolis airport. But I've been to a couple of places. Sometimes, the flight's delayed or whatever, right? I think that most of the gastropubs in the airport are overpriced. They tend to be fine just in terms of the accommodations. The food's nice. I don't really regret it, but it's just a little bit too pricey. The 3 places I've been that I've enjoyed, and it's going to be weird that I mentioned price and bring this one up, include Surdyk's, which I didn't know that they had food at their airport location, but they do. It's mostly sandwiches and paninis, but they were really good, and they've got some good appetizers. I enjoyed that. And maybe it's pricey, but I don't remember seeing sticker shock or anything like that. I very much enjoyed it. Obviously, if you wanted a cheese plate, it's Surdyk's. They do that for you. And if you want wine, you'll definitely get it. But kind of more standard, Red Cow I've really enjoyed. James mentioned that there's a Blue Door at the airport and he didn't love it that much. And that's not a huge surprise. Sometimes quality just happens to fall off at an airport location. I didn't notice that with the Red Cow location. And so I enjoyed that. And then Holy Land, I would probably put up there, even though I don't think it's as good as the Holy Land in Northeast. It's hard to do that, but it was still pretty good. So those are probably the 3 places. And then of the gastropubs, I did enjoy Stone Arch. It was pretty good. It is just pricey though.
Boy, I still can't get over my dislike of Holy Land. It's been over a decade, and I still just can't. It's been closer to 15 years, and I still can't get over my dislike of it. I tried. Lord knows I tried. I even last time I was there in Minneapolis for a layover. I went and I tried it, and I just couldn't do it. I'm a bad person, and I should be dealt with as such. Kyle Slaby asks, for a Reef Psychology Corner, you have proven, after years of study and peer review, that free will does not exist. Every action taken is a reaction to a mixture of stimuli that cannot be stopped or overwritten. The concept of good and evil evaporate when every action can be summed up as a list of cause and effects in perpetuity. You are able to predict with this knowledge how to eliminate deviant behavior and radicalize the concept of punishment. For how can you punish someone for an action they could not choose? At that point, can you ever forgive Don from Ohio for the things he's done?
Geez. Okay, so the first hurdle here is, what is the point of this question if free will doesn't exist? Because I wouldn't have the capacity to choose to forgive Don from Ohio, right? If free will doesn't exist, my capacity to forgive him is, first of all, meaningless, right? Because in a world where you can't choose. But second of all, preconditioned. So the answer to this question, of course, is who knows, right? But whatever happens, it's going to happen. And my answer now won't change what the answer will be. But second, let's assume that I'm the only person with free will because I wrote this paper and that's how magic works. Would I choose to forgive Don from Ohio for the things that he's done? No, because the way that you interact in this world is built off of the offenses that people give you or take from you, even though you might know that the reason that they've committed those offenses has nothing to do with their actions. And I think a really good example of this is probably a Marxist who gets mugged, right? Is probably a good example of this. Because a lot of Marxists might believe that the material conditions that somebody grew up in would drive them to do things that require them to make a living outside of the economic system because it doesn't provide for them. They have to find a way to provide for themselves, and it's just not doing that for them, and so they have to engage in violence. It's their last. It's the last way that they can feed their kids. That person is still mad at the person that mugged them more often than not, right? Anyway, Don from Ohio is worse than that person.
I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that. I just enjoy the idea of a Marxist being mugged and just be like, well, crap. Damian Barrett wraps us up this episode. Question for Reefs. I haven't actually watched it, TV Corner. I've been quite enjoying the show Winning Time, despite knowing little to nothing about either basketball or the Lakers. If HBO were to produce a similar show about the Vikings, which era would you like to see and who would you cast?
again, the 2005 Vikings. I can't get over how much I would love for the 2005 Vikings to be memorialized in some way, right? And this would start from the end of the 2004 season to the end of the 2005 season. So you could include, the ticket fixing and the love boating and the draft and all that. But yeah, I think the 2005 season would be great. I think the 2010 season is probably better television, but I remember it better, so I don't really need it as much. But I mean, I could do either. Both were amazing in terms of content. I think that you probably get some really good stories out of like the 1969 season, which is probably the best defense to have played football, at least until the 2000s, but certainly up there. But yeah, to me, it is probably 2005. There's a really great argument for 2010, but like you can only choose meme seasons, right? Because for the Lakers, it's like, well, which championship season do we choose, or which set of championships or personalities from championship seasons do we choose? And for the Vikings, it's like, man, what hilarious stories are we about to tell?
Well, what if you did this? What if you did the very end of 2008 through 2011? So you end up having
that's a good way to like arc it.
Yeah. So that ends up being your arc. So you start off with T-Jack at the very end. The team's frustrated, can't decide what direction they're going to go to, and they decide to get Favre, and so you have all the drama involving Favre there, and then you have the build of that season and how it's moving toward great, and it's moving toward championship, and then it ends suddenly and is all unsatisfied, and then they have to go get him back, and it all goes horribly wrong in that next year, and Favre ends up getting knocked out for the season, and then they go and try to do it again with McNabb and they draft a quarterback. It's all one giant mess, and you have Joe Webb running around for no reason. Like you can do the
getting
full
into
gamut.
The Tuesday night game. Oh yeah,
the full gamut.
And the thing is, like, Joe Webb is like a weird connective tissue for this because he's there in the Favre era too.
Exactly.
Right?
So this whole thing, you got Percy Harvin. What's great personality for that too. This could work. Also, Winning Time is an awesome TV show, and I am really, really enjoying it.
Yeah, I've heard really good things about it. What's really funny is my first date with Chelsea, who I'm with, right, was Winning Time with Reggie Miller, the 30 for 30.
That probably says a lot more about you than it probably should.
I'm fine, sure, whatever.
I'm not.
It worked, right?
Well, no, listen, I am out of the business of judging people in relationships for what they. No, I'm not out of the business. That's the wrong way to put it. I've just recognized how terrible I am in it, and I'm just moving on, both in the answer of questions and relationships in general. But I'm not judging on that necessarily. I'm just saying that just says a lot. Well, that said, it's a great 30 for 30.
It is a great 30 for 30. I would not suggest it as date material, let me be honest. But it did work for me.
I mean, is there a 30 for 30 that works as date material? I mean, the June 6th one is kind of interesting. You got OJ, you got the...
I mean, I don't know, the U? I don't know. Oh, so here's
small potatoes, the USFL story.
Yeah, right. Hey, you remember that Donald Trump guy? You want to watch something about how he screwed something else up? Great date. That might work for a lot of people actually, but my theory is that if I'm endearing to somebody, because I can't imagine I'm a very pleasant person to date, my theory is that if I'm endearing to someone, it's because I'm passionate about some things, or I can talk at length about some things, or I can get excited about some things, and then I want to share those things. So if I've gotten past the hurdle of being an unlikable person, so once we're past that hurdle, if they've like bought in despite this enormous mountain, right, then they have to find something about me that they like, and I posit that it would be my ability to talk about stuff that I care about. And that would just mean that I'm like, oh man, this 30 for 30 was great. I'm like trying to say like, hey, if I wanted to convince somebody to watch football, what is the one player that I think would get them to kind of understand how exciting football is? And to me, that's Barry Sanders, right? And so that actually, I also showed her Barry Sanders highlights. Because I think that player is a pure expression. His highlights are a pure expression of football and what makes it interesting. Now, nowadays, you can also include like Michael Vick and Lamar Jackson would be great, but they're just like obviously good players that you don't have to know anything about football to enjoy watching. And so that's like how my brain works. And I was like, Chelsea played basketball, so what can I like share about like my experience with basketball that we can like watch together? And it was Winning Time, because that 30 for 30 is funny as hell. So that's my theory, that I'm undateable, and that's why we watched Winning Time.
Just going through the first couple seasons, just because I watched most of them as they were coming out. Yeah, there's really not a great date movie out of this.
Did you just go through it?
Yep. I mean, there's a couple that wouldn't be not interesting, but I still think the June 17th, 1994 is just interesting because there's no narration. It's just flipping between things during the day.
Yeah, it's really uniquely done. Like at first, like when I first heard like a newscaster voice, I was like, oh, they're going to use like the news to frame it. That's like the most boring possible way you could do a documentary. And like they didn't really, like the news obviously is a really important narrative device to tell you kind of what's happening, but it wasn't like they were using it as a cheap way around telling a story. It's actually a very difficult way of telling a story, and they did it really well.
Yeah, other than that, boy, there's not really. I mean, Once Brothers was really good, so, but yeah, you're kind of stuck. But that is going to be this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Arif, where can they find your work? What do you have to plug?
So I'm going to get some pieces up about, what the recent pro days, and how to update the Vikings potential list of draftees, based off of pro day data. I'm going to start doing the mock draft tracker over at The Athletic, which, is really more of just a draft news tracker where we're tracking, a bunch of news all at once for the draft. Obviously that's independent of the consensus board. That's going to be down the road. But yeah, that's the stuff we're doing over at The Athletic. And then of course, if I have time, I'm going to do like a Zadarius Smith breakdown because he's like the premier signing of this offseason.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We will have a special bonus episode for everyone out on the main stream here in a couple of days, so look out for that. But for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of The Athletic, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.